Welcome to a close reading of Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 4, Abbot Hugo. So before I go and start reading the chapter, I just wanted to set the context a little bit because this is an interesting chapter to say the least. So in this chapter, we're going to get a glimpse of what life in the monastery under Abbot Hugo was like. And Abbot Hugo is the monk that reigned in this monastery of St. Edmundsbury from 1157 to 1180 when he died. So 23 years Abbot Hugo was at the realm. And Jocelyn, the monk that is writing these chronicles, he has entered the monastery right around 1180. So he's catching the last glimpses of Abbot Hugo's reign. Now, obviously, Jocelyn is a novice. Jocelyn is reporting to at this time, Master of Novices, Monk Samson. And we know, obviously looking back, that at the time, after Abbot Hugo dies, the Master of Novices, Samson, is going to be promoted to Abbot Samson, and he's going to reign for 30 years at this monastery. So the bulk of the writings of Jocelyn are going to be about Abbot Samson's time. This is just like the trailing end of Abbot Hugo's time at the monastery. And we're going to see, so that would have been fine, that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that the Abbot Hugo was not a good leader. He was a weak leader, and he was plunging the monastery into financial ruin because essentially he was doing the borrowing payday, the what's it called when you're the borrower of a payday loan? Yeah, so he was borrowing money from the Jewish community, specifically one Jew, Benedict the Jew, as he's referred to. He was borrowing money from this person at usurious rates, enormous rates. And and he was saddling the monastery with financial debts and burdens that would take a generation to fix, basically. So very, very bad situation that Abbot Hugo is going to leave the monastery with. The reason that now all of this would be fine. They're just telling the tale of some monastery in the 1100s. But the reason that I found it shocking, and so therefore I'm setting context a little bit, is the invective with which the we're also going to see, just to prepare make this point before I make my actual point, we're going to see Jocelyn, the chronicler, the monk who's living in the year 1180. We're going to see his voice and his recalls of the accounts blend in with Carlyle's voice. So it becomes very difficult to tell apart, is this Carlyle speaking or is this Jocelyn speaking? Is this Carlyle's opinion about what Benedict is doing or something? So the voices become intertwined, I think intentionally so. We saw, for example, that when Carlyle was referring to a couple of chapters back to the Manchester insurrection, Carlyle was speaking from the Manchester insurrectioners' point of view. He was saying we, he was talking about their demands as if he's part of the group. Carlyle is a writer, he's not part of the people who marched in the streets or something. But we see Carlyle fuses himself with a certain group when he identifies with them. And so in this chapter, we're going to see Carlyle identifying with the monk, which is with the monks, with Jocelyn and the monks at St. Edmundsbury, which is a little bit insane because Carlyle is Scottish and these monks are not. Carlyle is not Catholic. At this time, there's barely any sort of Catholicism left after Henry VIII in England. So this is or at the very least, St. Edmundsbury was totally destroyed by the time of Carlyle. So it's it's weird. It's not like Carlyle is part of a Catholic community and he's seeing, he's crashing out on Benedict the Jew because he hurt his community. This is him identifying with a group that he's not really a part of in the present, which is why it's both confusing and a little bit shocking. But yeah, so that's Carlyle, so we're going to read it. But the other part is I thought, this was the first time that I felt a significant philosophical disagreement with Carlyle, where he's going to talk about this this usury again, spewing invectives at this one person who was being usurious. And I'm just but this is not a one person problem. Like it's kind of, it feels like, imagine if there was like a usuriously rate applying bank or something, and like you got extremely upset at the one like loan broker at that bank that gave you this terrible usurious loan, right? Like if you have a grievance against this usury, especially like a grievance against the usury that happened 700 years ago, it's not even like a relevant kind of, in no way is it relevant in their time. You would think that like your critique would be a little bit more systemic. Like you would, for example, ask yourself, why are the banking laws uh, erected in such a way that they allow for this kind of a thing to happen? Like that might be your approach. At least that would be my approach. And then you would ask, like, who was the sovereign at the time? Who are the people responsible for the laws and things like that? Like it would not be my anger to the, I would, it's already hard for me to like understand why Carlyle is so furious against a person that lived 700 years ago from his time. But that's already something I cannot really like identify with. But furthermore, like if you are gonna crash out on someone for being usurious against a monastery, you wouldn't crash out against the particular moneylender. You would crash out against the king that allowed for something like this to happen. Like, I also feel this is what I mean by the philosophical disagreement with Carlyle. I feel like his anger is so misplaced. Like, so I just thought that's like fascinating. This disagreement. Like I almost feel, Carlyle was told. I was told that he's like a reactionary writer, and I'm getting such a like liberal perspective here, such an individualist perspective. So that was like very surprising, shocking to see. Um, and yeah, the other thing though, so after I like meditated on it a little bit, I also thought like, regardless of how much I disagree with Carlyle's point of view, it is a little bit refreshing to see a historian who wears his heart on his sleeve like this. Like you will see when we read it, like he is not holding anything back. He is saying his opinion about Benedict the Jew. So it's just interesting. Like you would never see a historian say, 1/100th of that in the modern time. And that's not because like our historians across the world today are these like completely dispassionate people who are so much more objective. It's more like they hide their intentions. They hide which side they're supporting through like frame games, through selective picking of the information and stuff. And so after meditating on it a little bit, I thought it was like refreshing to see like a historian that puts out his own perspective so honestly like that. So it's interesting. It's definitely an acquired taste. I'm not sure I acquired it, but we're going to read it together and we're going to see how this goes. So let me switch to over here. All right. Chapter 4, Abbot Hugo. It is true, all things have two faces, a light one and a dark. It is true, in 3 centuries much imperfection accumulates. Many an ideal, monastic or other, shooting forth into practice as it can, grows to a strange enough reality, and we have to ask with amazement, is this your ideal? For, alas, the ideal has always to grow in the real, and to seek out its bed and board there, often in a very sorry way. No beautifulest poet is a bird of paradise, living on perfumes, sleeping in the ether with outspread wings. The heroic, independent of the bed and board, is found in Drury Lane Theatre only. To avoid disappointments, let us bear this in mind. So here Carlyle is already, you can tell, like he's not going to give us good news. He's saying, but, I'm also getting the sense that the bad news that we're about to receive, he's excusing it a little bit. He's like preparing the ground for us for the things that we're going to hear to be excused, because he's saying, no monastery, nothing lives up to its ideal. Like nothing that has to be made into reality can live up to the ideal with which it was formed. So, and we know like St. Edmundsbury had this incredible story, this like wonderful landlord Edmund who was killed by the Danes, whose body was like resurrected and embalmed and with like sacred songs and joys with by the people of that region, and who when the news reached Rome, they went through their process and canonized him, and then the monastery was raised, and then the monastery got gifts. Like this is an extraordinary story of St. Edmundsbury, the monastery. But now we are 3 centuries in. The events, the monastery, it was founded in the year 870. We are now in the year 1180. So squarely 3 centuries later. And now, the ideals with which the monastery was founded have crashed on the shores of reality. And clearly, initially, the fervor, the spirit of the times could be likened to that of a bird in the ether, bird of paradise, like something very pure and very uncorrupted and very much like above us. This was a unique thing, a unique moment in time that created this monastery. And now we are, suffice it to say, we are concerned this is a time now in the year 1180 that is concerned with bed and board, the material things. Like now, the monastery is an organization. It has organizational momentum, and it does not have some kind of idealistic fervor. And Carlyle is like preparing us. Carlyle is like almost a little bit taking the side of Abbot Hugo, the side of the way things are, because he's saying to the reader, like, don't be too harsh in your judgment, because this is just what happens to ideals when they become real. And he's saying this, the heroic, independent of bed and board, so independent of like materialistic concerns, you can only find the heroic in Drury Lane Theatre, which is a famous London playhouse. So Carlyle is imploring the reader to withhold our judgment a little bit, which also is like implying that we're going to hear some stuff we're going to be very judgmental about potentially. And Carlyle is like trying to tamper our anger or trying to tamper our reaction when we're about what we're trying to read, what we're going to read now. By the law of nature, too, all manner of ideals have their fatal limits and lot, their appointed periods of youth, of maturity, of perfection, of decline, degradation, and final death and disappearance. There is nothing born but has to die. Ideal monasteries, once grown real, do seek bed and board in this world, do find it more and more successfully, do get at length too intent on finding it, exclusively intent on that. They are then like diseased, corpulent bodies, fallen idiotic, which merely eat and sleep, ready for dissolution by a Henry VIII or some other. Jocelyn St. Edmundsbury is still far from this last dreadful state, but here too the reader will prepare himself to see an ideal not sleeping in the ether like a bird of paradise, but roosting, as the common woodfowl do, in an imperfect, uncomfortable, more or less contemptible manner. So we're going to catch the monastery. We're going to get a glimpse of the monastery in Abbot Hugo's time. That's going to be imperfect, uncomfortable, contemptible. Carlyle says, he first talked about in very generalities, ideals and realities. Now, ideal monasteries, he's saying they also go through this progression of ideal where there's an ideal, it's born, it has a youth, a maturation, and then a decline and death. So we get the sense we're very much in this like decline or degradation stage of an ideal, where the monasteries, like once at first they're ideals, but then they seek bed and board, so they have to manage like materially their possessions, their people, and it becomes like an organization. And at some point, it only becomes only an organization. Like it loses the connection to the numinous, it loses the purpose for which this monastery was built. It loses the connection to St. Edmund. It just loses that sort of initial idealism with which it was founded. And so Carlyle is saying we are we are still far from this last dreadful state. So at this point, in Jocelyn's time, we are 300 years after the monastery was founded, and we are 300 years before the monastery was dissolved by King Henry VIII after their anti-Catholic measures, as we had read in previous chapters. So, so now we are right in the like half-life of the monastery. And our initial ideals, the birds of paradise, the aloof, kind of pure spirit, has now become like a common woodfowl. So it's now resting, like roosting, setting down to sleep on a perch. So it's no longer in the ether up above. It's like it's on a perch. We can see it's very much in reality. And it's like a woodfowl as opposed to a bird of paradise. So it's like an ordinary bird. So it's not quite like it's not on the chopping block yet. The monastery is going to survive another 300 years, but we can definitely see it's a far cry from the spirit with which the monastery was initially founded and run. Abbot Hugo, as Jocelyn, breaking at once into the heart of the business, apprises us, had... Now, this is the part where I told you, first of all, we're going to get like invective, but also like Carlyle makes it seem like what we're reading here is like straight coming from Jocelyn, but we're going to see like the more it goes on, especially with some like timeline lapses, we cannot tell anymore. Like, is this really just Jocelyn speaking and Carlyle merely like passing on what's written in the Chronicles, or has Carlyle added his own commentary on it? So you're going to see this intertwining thing happening more often from now. Abbot Hugo, as Jocelyn, breaking at once into the heart of the business, apprises us, had in those days grown old, grown rather blind, and his eyes were somewhat darkened. Aliquantium calivager, something Latin, but what it means is his eyes grew somewhat dim. So we see an old man, a blind man, or at least partially blind man. He dwelt apart very much in his thalamus, or peculiar chamber, so he has his own room in the monastery and he's retreating there. Got into the hands of flatterers, a set of mealy-mouthed persons who strove to make the passing hour easy for him easy, and for themselves profitable, accumulating in the distance mere mountains of confusion. So this Abbot Hugo, he is surrounding himself with mealy-mouthed people. That means avoiding plain direct speech, speaking timidly, cautiously, or insincerely. So there are a lot of like people that are flattering him. I love this like phrase, got into the hands of flatterers, like as if people that flatter you are predators basically, and he got in their hands. So interesting kind of description. These are insincere, flattering people. Their only goal is to make Abbot Hugo's last days easy for him and profitable for themselves. So the problem, that by itself like is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem, we get a sense of it here, is accumulating in the distance mere mountains of confusion. So whatever these flatterers and Abbot Hugo are up to in the present day, in the distance, that's going to cause a mountain of trouble for us. They're taking decisions in the present that put the future of the monastery at risk. Old Dominus Hugo, and Dominus means, it's a Latin word for lord or master, used as a respectful title for a man's name, before a man's name. Old Dominus Hugo sat inaccessible in this way, far in the interior, wrapped in his warm flannels and delusions, inaccessible to all voice of fact, and bad grew ever worse with us. So the situation is getting worse and worse, and Dominus Hugo, Abbot Hugo, he is somewhere in the interior, he is inaccessible. He says it twice in the sentence, inaccessible in this way, inaccessible to all voice of fact. So he is like an ostrich, he buried his hand in the sand, he does not want to hear bad news, he does not want to hear any news. He is wrapped in his warm flannels and delusions, like what what an image. Like, you get the sense of a modern person, like wrapped in their snuggy blanket and put on a noise canceling headphone and just like completely sensorially detached. He is also like partially blind. So this man is literally like, both literally and also in terms of spirit, not open to perceiving signals from the outside anymore. He's just seeking comfort. And all in the meantime, bad grew ever worse. So this, the fact that he has retreated impacts everybody else in a negative way, everybody other than the flatterers. Not that our worthy old Dominus Abbess was inattentive to the divine offices or to the maintenance of a devout spirit in us or in himself, but the account books of the convent fell into the frightfulest state, and Hugo's annual budget grew yearly emptier, or filled with futile expectations, fatal deficit, wind, and debts. So clearly, like, the thing that's going wrong, the thing that is festering, the thing that is mortgaging the future of this monastery is the financial state of the monastery. Like, spiritually, it might be intact. Spiritually, the abbot is doing what he should be doing. But the account books, the financials of the monastery are getting into ruin. The resources are getting meager. And then there's this like futile expectations that I loved. Like, you can already tell, like, if anybody has worked in a corporation, you can tell when like there's a sales projection for next year, and everybody in the room knows that that's unrealistic. It's not going to be met. And so, but like sometimes, higher ups want to hear that, and so they hear what they want to hear, and there are people to tell them what they want to hear. So this is just like a very negative thing when an institution gets to that point. So it's also surprising that the person that sees this is Jocelyn. Jocelyn is a novice monk. As he's writing these, he's a novice monk. He's brand new at the monastery. So the thing, like, this sort of financial problems at the monastery are perceptible literally to everyone. I mean, if they're perceptible to a literal novice that just walked in the doors of the monastery, they're easily perceptible by everyone else. So this is not like some insidious problem that like weaseled its way there and it's going to shock you one day when it's there. This is like, a large train that you can see in the distance hurling towards you, and everyone can see it. But Abbot Hugo, everyone but Abbot Hugo, right? Who has retreated, he is refusing to the voice of fact. He's refusing to perceive the obvious giant problem that is looming. His one worldly care was to raise ready money. Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. So Abbot Hugo is just trying to save the day, and you get the sense, just because it's sufficient for the day, there's an evil in it, which is that it's mortgaging the future. And how he raised it. Now we're going to start the invectives. And how he raised it. From usurious, insatiable Jews, every fresh Jew sticking on him like a fresh horse leech, sucking his and our life out, crying continually, give, give. Take one example of scores. Our camera having fallen into ruin, William the sacristan received charge to repair it. Strict charge, but no money. Strict charge, but no money. So there's a chamber, a room that's fallen into ruin, and the sacristan, William Monk sacristan is the monk in charge of the church's sacred objects, rooms, and upkeep. So Abbot Hugo told his underling, William the sacristan, you must fix this room, but gave him no money, no resources to do it, but a strict charge. This is not like, it would be nice if you could do it. Abbot Hugo demanded that this room be fixed with no resources. Abbot Hugo. Hugo, the camera in ruins, and Hugo penniless and inaccessible, right? So he's like, he gave an order and then retreated. So he now like, this is like, I give you an order, I don't give you resources, and I'm inaccessible even if you want to raise objections. Like, terrible leadership by Abbot Hugo, just horrible in my opinion. Um, the camera in ruins and Hugo penniless and inaccessible, Wilhelmus Sacrista borrowed 40 marks, some 7 and 20 pounds, so that's an old way of saying 27 pounds, of Benedict the Jew, and patched up our camera again. But the means of repaying him, there were no means. Hardly, so they saved the day, right? The rube is fixed, right? But now there was no means of repaying him. Hardly could Sacrista Celerarius, and we know what that means from our previous reading, which is the guy that manages the house kitchen, the one that literally puts food on the table. So neither hardly could the Sacrista Celerarius or any public officer get ends to meet on the indispensablest scale. So even for the most necessary things, with their shrunk allowances, ready money had vanished. So the monastery is not being run well financially. The officers don't have any money to run. Their allowances have shrunk. But worse than that, it's that demands are being made that are not in line with the resources from above. And so they're having to resort to go to payday lenders. They're being forced. Like, by Abbot Hugo, it's obviously a choice, but he's like amplifying this choice by giving unreasonable orders, unreasonable with in proportion to the resources that they have to his underlings. He's putting them in an awful spot. I mean, this is possibly triggering the any one of my 13 listeners who are working in corporations. Whenever like you have demands on you that are strict, that are not in alignment with resources, and it's causing, like, even if you are the best of persons and you don't want to mortgage the future of your monastery, it's putting you in a position where you have to make short-term decisions in exchange for long-term, like when you have to make you know how people say, don't be penny wise and pound foolish? They're being forced to make decisions that are penny wise and pound foolish. It's just an awful thing to see this. And one of my major, I think, just disagreements with Carlyle is going to be how easily, with Carlyle or with Jocelyn the monk, because their voices are intertwined, so it's hard to tell who's the one doing this speaking. But like, they're focusing way too much on Benedict the Jew or the Jewish community that is doing the usury, and way too little on these horrible, terrible leaders of the monastery. So anyway, Benedict's 27 pounds grew rapidly at compound interest, at length, when it had amounted to 100 pounds, he, on the day of settlement, presents the account to Hugo himself. Hugo already owed him another 100 of his own, and so there it has become 200. Hugo, in a fine frenzy, threatens to depose. Oh my God, I hate Hugo. I hate Hugo. Hugo, in a fine frenzy, threatens to depose the sacristan, to do this and to do that, but in the meanwhile, how to quiet your insatiable Jew. Look, I'm sorry, the insatiable Jew is not the problem. Hugo is the problem. Hugo, for this couple of hundreds, grants the Jew his bond for 400 payable at the end of 4 years. At the end of 4 years, there he is, of course, still no money, and the Jew now gets a bond for 880 pounds to be paid by installments, 80 pounds every year. Here was a way of doing business. So this is like awful. It's kind of like funny in a kind of dark and horrible kind of way, where William, the sacristan, he had to borrow 27 pounds, right? Like, he was put in a horrible position, and he had to borrow the 27 pounds to do what Hugo forced him to do, which is fix up this chamber, right? This 27 becomes fourfold. It becomes 100. And when it reaches that point, and Benedict comes to demand his money, it's darkly humorous that by that time, another 100 was owed to him, to this very same person, by Abbot Hugo himself. So now it's like 200. And then the 200 together become 400 payable at the end of 4 years. And then when that did not work, and there's still no money at the end of those 4 years, it became 880 pounds. So we see something like the 27 initial pounds grew over the course of like 4 years, 5 years, something like that, over the course of that, grew to a liability of 880 pounds, 37-fold. This is like insane. And it's not like, once again, certain things, like the choices by themselves can either be like a one-time mistake, or if there's like a plan made to resurrect the situation. But we see, what has Hugo done in those 4 years? Right, he got an extension at enormous expense to the monastery. He got his debts consolidated to 400 at the end of 4 years. What has he done in those 4 years? He could not, like, these are such terrible choices. It's like he's running out the clock on his own life. But by doing that, he's saddling the monastery with generational debt. This is horrible. Because, of course, like, if you're having a hard time paying 27, you're going to have a horrible time paying 880. That's unreasonable. That is generational problem at that point. And yet we see like this, we see like by Carlyle and by Jocelyn, the focus on Benedict and like insatiable. And I'm obviously not saying usury is a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing. And in modern times, pretty much any polity has at least some restrictions on usury to prevent this kind of a thing, right? To prevent this sort of like snowballing of problems, where like a little problem, a mistake, a bad leadership, something like that gives you an original liability of 27, or the problem of one chamber in ruins, like one section of your monastery that you can't fix and it's kind of embarrassing and ruinous. Like, it takes a small problem like that, and when you fuel it with unrestricted usury, it becomes generational debt of hundreds of people. So obviously I'm against it, but I'm like, let's also place the blame at the right spot. Like the existence of the money lending does not excuse the much more glaring problem of Abbot Hugo, the much more glaring problem of the fact that like the his horrible, awful leadership, his like terrible, Carlyle is the one. This is another reason why it's surprising to read it from Carlyle. He spent the first book basically lecturing us. I mean, in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way, but he spent the first book, the Proem, talking a lot about where is the wise leadership of England. England needs wise leadership. We need heroes. And then there's the I don't want to say like a total excusal of Abbot Hugo, but there's like an overlooking of Abbot Hugo's horrible leadership, and then focus on this on the Jewish community that are providing the usurious loans to them. Again, like, that's obviously not a very charitable, or at least it's not a stabilizing thing to do. Usury by itself is extremely destabilizing, right? We know that. That's why most nations, like even monoethnic nations, they provide limits on usury. They provide limits on how much you can charge. And they also have limits, like, for example, if there's a retired person on a pension, and if they owe someone money, the wages of their pension cannot be garnered. Like, there's some protection there, because you literally cannot like make it such a there are limits on how big the snowball can grow, right? There are limits on how much bad choices can grow before they become like systemic, terrible problems. In every normal society, there is that. So clearly in this society, there wasn't that. And I'm not endorsing, like, the problems are also much more salient and much more, like, any problem you can think of becomes about 10 times, 100 times more problematic when it's visibly done by one ethnic group to another ethnic group, or by one religious group to another religious group, right? So I'm also seeing, like, here, so you can say, it's not very charitable, but it's also by like competing ethnic groups, right? And so it makes me think, like, another person that is deafeningly absent in this chapter is Henry II. Henry II, the king, the sovereign, that like both the monastery are reporting to the king, as well as the Jews are reporting to the king. Like, everybody's reporting to the king, right? So I'm like, where is the where's the blame placed on the king like this? Because you can't have like one ethnic group impose usury or make usury exclusively accessible to another ethnic group, to this kind of snowballing effect that's going to cause ethnic resentment internally. And indeed it did. We're going to see a reference of that. But I'm just like, I'm seeing like, what comes to mind, the word that comes to mind as I'm reading this is dereliction of duty. Like dereliction of duty by Abbot Hugo, because he is bargaining away, he is like giving away the future of his monastery to just pass the day comfortably. So enormous dereliction of duty there, but also dereliction of duty of the monarch, Henry II. Because like the thing that gives you legitimacy to rule over a large swath of land like England, and all the different like communities, ethnic and religious communities therein, is that you have to keep a close eye on the internal, on the grievances that are accumulating between these groups. And you have to resolve them. Like that literally is what leadership is. That literally gives you the divine right to rule. And like, again, we see like this enormous focus on what's going on with the Jewish community. They seem to be getting the ire of Jocelyn/Carlyle. Meanwhile, they're totally silent on King Henry II. And they're excusing, they're like gentle on Abbot Hugo. So this is why I thought like, I was both like shocked and found myself intensely disagreeing with Jocelyn/Carlyle. But anyway, we're going to keep reading. Neither yet is this insatiable Jew, again, wrong place of focus. Neither yet is this insatiable Jew satisfied or settled with. He had papers against us of small debts of 14 years old. So this problem has been festering for 14 years. Abbot Hugo ruled for 23 years. 14 of them, he was borrowing usuriously. 14 years, this problem has festered, it has grown, this bad leadership, it has created a class of like flatterers around him, it has suppressed the good people, and it has elevated the most terrible people. Like, awful, awful leadership by Abbot Hugo. He had papers against us of small debts, 14 years old. His modest claim amounts finally to £1,200 besides interest. So all in all, they're in for £1,200. And one hopes he never got satisfied in this world. One almost hopes he was one of those beleaguered Jews who hanged themselves in York Castle shortly afterwards and had his usances and quittances and horseleech papers summarily set fire to, like, way to not take responsibility. This is, insane. We'll talk about this reference. For approximate justice will strive to accomplish itself, if not in one way, then in another. Jews and also Christians and heathens. So now this is very much like Carlyle speaking, even though like this is the Jewish community doing the usury here, and Benedict the Jew is getting like the ire of Carlyle. He's also saying like this is his real ire, his true ire is usury itself. Like you can tell Carlyle is extremely anti-usury, which I understand because it is a destabilizing force, as we spoke. So Jews and also Christians and heathens, so pagans, like anybody who accumulate in this manner. So anyone who practices usury, Carlyle says, though furnished with never so many parchments, do at times get their grinder teeth successfully pulled out of their head, each day a new grinder, till they consent to disgorge again. A sad fact worth reflecting on. So this is like a very violent passage. So what Carlyle/Jocelyn says here is like, again, like, well, let me not constantly interject my disagreement, and let me just narrate what he's saying. What he's saying is like, he's focusing on this Benedict and that they owed him £1,200, and he's saying like there's insatiable and one almost hopes. Then he's doing a reference like one almost hopes he hanged himself in York Castle. I was like, what is that about? So this is, if I switch here for a second, the castle in reference, the York Castle, is this castle. And in the year 1190, so about 10 years after these writings are happening, The entire Jewish community was trapped by an angry mob inside the tower of York Castle. Many members of the community chose to commit suicide rather than be murdered or forcibly baptized by the attackers. And yeah, this is like this event. And so Carlyle / Jocelyn is like saying one almost wishes that, because they're placing their ire on Benedict the Jew, so they're hoping like that one almost hopes he was one of those people that 10 years later met their end in York Castle. So that is what they're saying. But and then he goes, so this is like truly, I mean, the peak of hate. The peak of hate you can have against one person. I will say, like, I sort of, if this was only Jocelyn writing, one could understand, like, this is a young monk, he's just figuring things out, and he thinks that this person, Benedict, is like putting his monastery into financial ruin, and maybe Abbot Hugo is like being the nice abbot to him or something, so he blames like the outsider. This is like psychologically understandable, but of course, Jocelyn would not have foreknowledge that 10 years later, this massacre is going to happen, right? So the person who's writing this, the person who wishes death upon Benjamin, is Carlyle. So I was like, this is insane. This is like something I have a hard time understanding, this kind of like emotional attachment to, once again, like events and people that are happening 700 years before his time. To not his co-ethnics, Carlyle is Scottish. To not his co-religionists, Carlyle is not, if you want to say he's ecumenical Christian, sure, but like he certainly is not Catholic. At this time, in the year 1850, England this is the year after King Henry VIII. The monastery itself is gone, right? So this, like, you're very much, we see like Carlyle getting worked up and spewing invectives against a person who is long dead, a community long dead, monastery long in ruins, and he's so worked up about it. He's totally crashing out over it. Like, so weird and interesting and strange to see. Like, I cannot identify with it at all. But the other thing that I found, like, a little bit, as I reflect on it, that, like, it's refreshing. Yeah, you can accuse Carlyle of many things. One thing you cannot accuse him of is hiding his own opinion, of like trying to insidiously subvert your opinion or something. Like, he is serving his opinions and biases and everything else on a silver platter for you to see. So this is also very just strange, different way of writing, like different way of communicating about historical stuff. It's difficult to put myself in his shoes. It's difficult for the reader to understand that. So at this point, I'm like morally reading it as like a curiosity, just like I mentioned, I think in the last video where Carlyle was referencing a quote in the Bible, and in the Bible, what they were doing is they really wanted to worship something, and they got impatient, and so they melted down some of their gold and made an idol and worshipped it. And I mentioned there, like, this is so unrelatable. And so similarly, like Carlyle's working up about this event is so unrelatable to me, but interesting nonetheless. And Carlyle is one of the greats of England, so we're going to keep reading. This event, so then Carlyle like muses on, for approximate justice will strive to accomplish itself. So clearly Carlyle is thinking, like, now I think a little bit of cooler heads have come to Carlyle's, like, after he has just said his piece, he's calmed down a little bit. So now he's making a more detached point, and he's saying something we might agree with, which is that it is fundamentally unjust that like 27 pounds becomes an obligation of, in the end, 1,200 pounds, right? That's 50 times as much probably. And so that's untenable, unstable. And he's saying approximate justice will strive to accomplish itself. So with referencing the York Castle stuff, like, this is if you can imagine, like, this is not just one person, but a whole community doing something like this to a whole another community, and this kind of grievances are festering and festering, and nobody, once again, like Carlyle does not mention where King Henry II is in all of this and why he's letting all of these grievances fester on, which is, in my opinion, like another huge dereliction of duty. Carlyle makes no mention of it, but at least Carlyle is saying, like, at the end, you're going to get uh, what Carlyle is saying here, grind your teeth pulled until they consent to disgorge again. So until there's a more equitable, like if I put this in modern day speak, like you can only concentrate wealth so much before there's some destabilizing event in the society and the wealth is redistributed in a more equitable fashion again. So this is a fact that we do see over and over in pretty much every country. There's been a wealth redistribution of some sort of or other. So I think this is a very, this general point is well taken. Jocelyn, we see, is not without secularity. So let me see. Yeah, this part, the part we're going to read now, is fascinating because it references a point that I had made in my first video in this series before reading book 2. We actually took a look at Jocelyn's Chronicles. And if you remember, I translated literally part of the Latin into English, and we looked at them, what they were saying, and I commented, like, this is not what I expected a monks in a monastery to be writing about. Namely, there were so many like mundane organizational affairs, like this person owes the abbot that much money and that person didn't pay his dues, and let's like sue these people, let's keep land records, let's do this kind of, it feels very almost technocratic, if I may say so. It feels like I'm reading the chronicles of like a random thief. Like I gave the analogy of like House of Stark. I feel like I'm seeing the minutes of the House of Stark. I'm not seeing really like a religious figure in here. So now Carlyle is I was so pleasantly surprised to have Carlyle make the same observation. Jocelyn, we see, is not without secularity. So he sounds secular. Our Dominus Abbas was intent enough on the divine offices, but then his account books, one of the things that strike us most, me too, that strike us most throughout in Jocelyn's Chronicle, and indeed in Edmer's Anselm, and Edmer's Anselm, refers to the medieval biography of Saint Anselm written by Edmer, a monk of Canterbury and Anselm's close companion. So this is very much like Jocelyn and Abbot Samson's kind of analogy with the Anselm and Edmer. So there's one monk that is like the main monk that is doing stuff, and the one monk that is chronicling and writing things down. So interesting. There's like more similar works like Jocelyn's Chronicles exist. And Carlyle is saying one of the things that strike us most throughout these works and other old monastic books, written evidently by pious men. Like we know they are monks. We know that they're pious. One of the things that strikes us is that there's almost no mention of whatever of personal religion in them. That the whole gist of their thinking and speculation seems to be the privileges of our order, strict exaction of our dues, like money stuff, God's honor, meaning the honor of our saint, and so forth. Is this not singular? A body of men set apart from society, right? They're in the monastery, set apart for perfecting and purifying their own souls, do not seem disturbed about that in any measure. The ideal says nothing about its idea. The ideal says nothing about its idea. Like the ideal with which this monastery was founded, Catholic monks doing Catholic things, and yet in the Chronicles we see none of that. Says much about finding bed and board for itself, constantly chronicling like material things. How is this? Carlyle wonders. And I wondered the same, like, how is this? This is so different from what I thought the chronicles of a monastery are going to be. Why, for one thing, bed and board, now we're going to see why, or Carlyle is going to give us a perspective of why, and it's very interesting. Why? For one thing, bed and board are a matter very apt to come to speech. It is much easier to speak of them than of ideas, and they are sometimes much more pressing with some. Nay, for another thing, may not this religious reticence in these devout good souls be perhaps a merit, a sign of health in them? Very interesting. Jocelyn, Edmer, and such religious men have as yet nothing of Methodism, no doubt, or even root of doubt. Religion is not a diseased self-introspection and agonizing inquiry. Their duties are clear to them, the way of supreme good plain, indisputable, and they are traveling on it. Religion lies over them like an all-embracing heavenly canopy, like an atmosphere and life element, which is not spoken of, which in all things is presupposed without speech. Is not serene or complete religion the highest aspect of human nature, as serene Kant, and we should define Kant here again. Kant is hypocritical and sanctimonious talk. So, very much opposed to serene religion. Is not serene or complete religion the highest aspect of human nature, as serene Kant, serene hypocrisy, or complete no religion is the lowest and miserablest, between which two all manner of earnest Methodisms, introspections, agonizing inquiries, never so morbid, shall play their respective parts, not without approbation. So with approbation, so they will find their audience and the people who engage in them. So Carlyle is now offering us two distinct reasons why in the Chronicles of Jocelyn we're seeing this extreme focus on like who gave money to who, on these like administrative minutia, basically. So who gave money to who sued whom, where are the land records kept, that sort of stuff. Like if you have a problem, as we saw, some of the abbots have a problem. They went to the Pope, and then they took the Pope, and with them went to the court of William King the Conqueror. So these are like very kind of in the weeds administrative material affairs. And Carlyle is giving us two reasons why the Chronicles are just full of those things instead of like religious opinions and religious introspection. He's saying, first of all, those kinds of administrative minutiae are just easier to write. It's harder to articulate an idea than it is to speak about, land records or something. Like those are easier to write. There's a certain amount of just whatever is easiest to record is recorded. In my profession, I'm a data scientist, and one of the things you always find with data, one of the perspectives that is common, but that you have to nip in the bud that you find is that people start recording the data that is easiest to acquire. So there might be like some data that you need, but it's more difficult. It's harder to approximate. You need to make approximations. You need to make calculations. People don't do that data, but they measure stuff and they keep extensive records of stuff that ultimately do not have predictive power on the decisions you need to take. So I just found it amusing that Carlyle, obviously, like Carlyle, as mentioned previously, he invented the Carlyle circle. So he found something. I haven't looked into it in detail myself, but suffice it to say he came up with some original math or solved or a math problem or something. So Carlyle understands the math aspect, and it's very interesting with these like nuances that another person, another writer who doesn't have like a quantitative mind might not pick up on this little subtle reason, and it's such a pleasure to see Carlyle picking up on that. But then he goes like, the other thing, and this part I found fascinating. The other thing is that the fact that they didn't speak of the religious stuff at all, is that perhaps a merit? Is that perhaps saying something good about their religiosity itself? And he's likening this religion to, so first of all, he's saying they don't really need to introspect. They don't need to question it. There's no doubt, not even a root of doubt, right? Religion is not something that you have to like think about and ponder and introspect. Religion is just this ever-present reality on them. It's like an all-embracing heavenly canopy, an atmosphere and life element. Like, for example, as I'm sitting here, I'm not commenting that like across me there's a sky, and on the sky, and the sky is blue, and like the sky has these properties. If I, in this whole podcast, like you would not find any reference to the sky, and that's normal because that is a reality of my life, as it is the reality of life to the readers or the listeners, right? We don't need to establish that there's a sky. We're not wondering about the sky as we're talking here. It's like this ever-present thing that looms sounds bad. So it's like it's embracing us. We live in its reality and its presence, but we don't need to like discuss it. It's not conspicuous to us. It's religion to them is like water to the fish. The fish are never, as they're swimming about, they're never reacting to the presence of water. They're not questioning the presence of water. Like they're reacting to other organisms. So to the extent that you could record the thoughts in a fish's brain, it would be other fish or predators or something. It would not be water. So it is interesting to say like their religiosity of those monks at that time, 7 centuries prior to Carlyle's time, was so much higher that religion became a thing that is not even written. So I thought that's fascinating perspective. Because I had when I first read the Jocelyn's Chronicles and I saw that there's like barely any mention of religion there, my instinct was the opposite direction. I was like, so are monasteries what I thought monasteries were? Is religion even being practiced there? Is this like, do we just call them like monasteries and think that they're religious, but they're actually kind of secular institutions? And Carlyle offers a different perspective. He's saying, in fact, it's not like they're more secular like us in the modern times, like in Carlyle's time as in ours. It's actually that they're so religious beyond anything that we can imagine, that religion is like they're steeped in religion. It's not even an object of discussion. Fascinating. And it's also interesting how Carlyle puts this thing where he says, serene, complete religion is the highest aspect of human nature. Like those monks with religion being an ever-present reality, ever-present and unspoken reality in their lives, they're like closer to the peak of human nature. And then Carlyle says purely hypocritical thought, like purely materialist sort of self-indulged thought is the lowest. And then Carlyle is putting the earnest Methodism's introspection. So the kind of religion that I expect religious people are like, or modern people expect religious people are to be like, which is this introspective, like, we read the Bible, we think about the Bible, we, compare and contrast the Bible or something. Like this kind of sort of involved religion is actually, despite being earnest, so it is earnest Methodism, our expectation, so Carlyle's and mine, like this kind of a modern person's expectation of a religious person is not the peak of human nature and peak of religiosity. It's actually like the middle. It's the middle layer. Interesting, fascinating way to look at it. But let any reader fancy himself one of the brethren in St. Edmundsbury Monastery under such circumstances. How can a Lord Abbot, all stuck over with horse leeches of this nature, front the world? He is fast losing. Now he's going to humanize it. And despite my, I would say like strong judgment of Abbot Hugo, I will say the reason that this chapter impacted me a lot since my reading of it yesterday, and like I was meditating on it as I thought of it, is like this human part of Abbot Hugo. If you can like get yourself to sympathize with him or walk a little bit in his shoes, like what a tragic character he is. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But like there is a very human story in all of this too. despite the fact that he was a horrible leader. But let any reader fancy himself one of the brethren in St. Edmundsbury Monastery under such circumstances. How can a Lord Abbot, all stuck over with horse leeches of this nature, front the world? So Abbot Hugo, he lost face. Like, imagine you're one of the monks in this monastery. I mean, we're like blaming Abbot Hugo for retreating from these problems into his chamber, into his comfortable place. But also, if we can hold a little bit of space, like, he lost face. He is, on some level, he knows he doesn't have the respect of the people around him, and he's giving up. And that's tragic, and that's sad to see. But definitely a human story. Definitely one that I can identify with. The lack of courage, that hit me deep. I never thought like I would, I not just sympathize, but like identify with a monk, with a head of the monastery in the 12th century. But thinking about his situation, it just made me think, yeah, I felt like that. I have been like that. He is fast losing his lifeblood, and the convent will be as one of Pharaoh's lean kine. So here, Pharaoh's lean kine, where was this? Are starved and thin cows, Pharaoh's dream in the book of Genesis. So meaning like he's putting such financial burdens on the monastery, Abbot Hugo, that the monastery will be emaciated, weak, and starving in no time. So he is fast losing his lifeblood. He's already at the end of his life. And his convent, the people in his ward, the institution he's responsible for, he's going to leave it like Pharaoh's lean kine. He's going to leave it emaciated. That's horrible. Old monks of experience draw their hoods deeper down, careful what they say. The monk's first duty is obedience. Our Lord the King, hearing of such work, sends down his almoner to make investigations, but what boots it? And now we're going to get to the part where I have less respect for Abbot Hugo. Like for a moment, I had like a human connection to Abbot Hugo, and now I'm about to lose it. You're going to see why. So, but here, when they say our Lord the King, like that's the king, the sovereign, the king of the country, sending his almoner. And we know almoner is the part both in the monastery, but also clearly of the king's court, that is the head of charitable givings, basically. So the king is sending his head of charitable giving to this monastery. So clearly, like this horrible financial situation of the monastery, word is getting to the king, and the king is sending some help. But first, obviously, they need to know what they're helping, so they want to understand the situation. But there's like divine help has reached the chambers of Abbot Hugo. Now we're going to see what Abbot Hugo does. But what boots it? Meaning, what good is it? Abbot Hugo assembles us in chapter and asks, if there's any complaint, not a soul of us dare answer. Yes, thousands, but we all stand silent. And the prior is the second in command of the monastery, and clearly one of the flatterers around Abbot Hugo, so one of the ones that's just telling him what he wants to hear. And the prior even says that things are in a very comfortable condition, whereupon old Abbot Hugo, turning to the royal messenger, says, you see, and the business terminates in that way. I, as a brisk guide, noticing youth and novice, so we're very much getting the account of Jocelyn here. He's the brisk guide noticing youth. He's a young man who's noticing the stuff, and even he can see, like even the king far away is hearing rumors about the terrible state of the monastery. And obviously the novice himself is also noticing all these things. He says, I could not help but asking of the elders, asking of Magister Samson in particular. So Jocelyn is the novice. The novices, the newest monks, report to the master of novices, who is Magister Samson, and in the future is going to be Abbot Samson. So now the novice Jocelyn is asking Magister Samson in particular, why you, Samson, well instructed and a knowing man, why haven't you spoken out? Why had not spoken out and brought matters to a bearing? Magister Samson was teacher of the novices, appointed to breed us up to the rules, and I loved him well. Fili me, answered Samson, my son. The burnt child shuns the fire. Dost thou not know our Lord the Abbot sent me once to Acre in Norfolk to solitary confinement and bread and water already? The Hinghams, Hugo and Robert, have just got home from banishment for speaking. This is the hour of darkness. Incredible line. This is the hour of darkness, the hour when flatterers rule and are believed. Videat Dominus, let the Lord see and judge. So now, I have thoroughly lost the human connection to Abbot Hugo here, because divine help has come. The king has heard of the troubles of this monastery, and the king has sent help, and Abbot Hugo has refused the help. He has refused it in the most, in undignifying sort of manner, in the most, it's not like the king came to Abbot Hugo in private and Abbot Hugo refused him. That would already, of course, be very bad. But he has taken it further, where he has gone through this charade of assembling the monks that are reporting to Abbot Hugo, right? This is so let me tell what he said, and then let me tell you what this reminds me of. Abbot Hugo has assembled the monks, and then the king's almoner is there. He's there to investigate the situation, and he's there to see what's going on, see if the monastery needs help, needs charity. And Abbot Hugo is pompously, and the prior that is flattering Abbot Hugo, but of course Abbot Hugo has probably chosen the prior, right? So this is one of the men that ultimately the burden lies with Abbot Hugo, in my opinion, the blame. So Abbot Hugo is assembling everyone in front of the king's man and saying, hey guys, is there a problem? Is there any complaints? And there's actually literally thousands of complaints, literally thousands of problems festering about that need to be fixed. And yet, because Abbot Hugo is standing tall and basically threatening his underlings, daring them to say anything in front of the king, everybody is silent. And here we see Jocelyn asks Samson, why didn't you say anything, Samson? You know what's going on. And Samson says, and you're lost every ounce of respect here. He says, our Lord Abbot sent me once to Acre in Norfolk. So now this is referring to a remote monastic property in Norfolk, used as a penal retreat. This is the monastic version of jail. The Abbot Hugo already once sent Samson to jail. So solitary confinement and bread and water. This is solitary confinement and restricted food. He's already sent Samson to jail once for speaking about the problems. He has sent two others, the Hinghams. They're maybe brothers or something. They seem to share a last name. Or maybe they're from the same place and from this place called Hingham. I'm not sure. But either way, they're two people, Hugo and Robert, that have just got home from the banishment, from another jail time. This Hugo and Robert are other monks that have just come from jail time for trying to speak out about the problems. So it's just, this is John of Hingham and Robert of Hingham. So, named after the town Hingham in Norfolk. So we're talking about two people that come from the same place, two monks that come from the same place. But so here we see for a minute there, for a little minute there, I connected with Abbot Hugo, because this is a man who's facing problems that are clearly beyond his ability to solve. And he's sensing that he lost the respect of his fellow monks. And so he's just retreating. There's a lack of courage, okay? That I feel is a very human story. I can connect to that. But then this part, I also can connect to this part. So it's sad all around, actually. But this is the part where there are people trying to help, both from the king and also at least 3 monks that we know of that tried to raise the situation, tried to do something about it, and he sent them to jail. He punished those who tried to help him. Of course, like, this both makes me lose respect for him, but it is also part of the human story, because I certainly can know times where there was a situation and I had lack of courage, and then in a moment like that, like, there were people trying to encourage me, but even in that sort of thing, even the like in the moment you're so reactive or maybe self-discouraged that you punish the messenger. And yeah, all too human story. The real sad truth here is that, of course, this is saddling the monastery. Like, all of this is a human story, except Abbot Hugo is in charge of a huge monastery. He's in charge of dozens of lives, if not hundreds, right? So the choices he's making, the human frailties that he has, they're going to impact the monastery for a long, long time. And that's the real sad part about it. And now, of course, I lose another piece of respect where when they owed money to Benedict, and some of the oldest ones were 14 years old. So this is not like a recent problem. This is a 14-year festering problem. Like a petty tyrant that puts down the people around him by daring them to speak. This is like in a corporate setting. Imagine if like the CEO has hauled in your boss and his team, including you, into like a room to ask if there's a problem or something. And like you're put in this awful situation to betray the boss you're going to have to deal with the boss forever, right? The CEO, the king's man, the almoner, he's just there for a day. You're going to have to deal with the abbot forever. So it's an incredibly uncomfortable and demeaning situation. Just horrible, but also very relatable. People to this day do it. And not to this extent, but to some extent, I have had the same character flaws of Abbot Hugo. So I can understand this very human story. In very truth, what could poor old Abbot Hugo do? Now, listen, I'm not on board. Carlyle is like yet again coming to them. What could an old abbot have done? And that's letting abbots too easy off the hook. I'm not on board with that, but again, we're reading Carlyle. We're not reading my story. So I'll try to refrain from my ideas. In very truth, what could poor old Abbot Hugo do? A frail old man, and the Philistines were upon him. That is to say, the Hebrews, so the moneylenders. He had nothing for it but to shrink away from them, get back into his warm flannels, into his warm delusions again. Again, the metaphor with like the comfortable, warm delusion. Happily, before it was quite too late, he bethought him of pilgriming to St. Thomas of Canterbury. So it refers to the medieval pilgrims traveling to Canterbury to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, the murdered archbishop whose tomb became one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in England. And here I have a little map where we can see this is the Bury of St. Edmunds, and over here is St. Thomas of Canterbury Church, so I assume the pilgrimage site is there too. So that's quite like a long road for an old, half-blind and kind of very a monk of ill health, basically, ill health. That's a long journey to make. So now Carlyle / Jocelyn is saying like happily before it was too late. Now, what they're talking about is before it was too late for the monastery, before the monastery was completely dead and gone in terms of finances. Before then, happily, the Abbot Hugo thought himself of pilgriming to St. Thomas of Canterbury. He set out with a fit train in the autumn days of the year 1118 near Rochester City. His mule threw him. So the mule that he was on threw, if you can imagine, like falling off a horse, falling off a mule, through an old man. He's a frail old man. He threw him. dislocated his poor knee pan, so dislocated his knee, raised incurable inflammatory fever, caught fever and inflammation, and the poor old man got his dismissal from the whole coil at once, so he died. Coil here, we always hear it as mortal coil, but coil means a noisy fuss, trouble, or turmoil. So, yeah, he was the troubles of the world. He was dismissed from them because he passed away. Saint Thomas, Saint Thomas Becket, Saint Thomas of Becket. Is this of Becket? Saint Thomas Becket. Yeah, I don't know what this A here is, but Saint Thomas Becket, though in a circuitous way, had brought deliverance. This is like the Saint Thomas bringing a rescue in a circuitous way, because he's obviously the pilgrimage site that Abbot Hugo was hoping to go to, and in this process he was kicked off the mule and died. And so it's kind of like Saint Thomas that rescued him from the troubles of this world. Neither Jew usurers, nor grumbling monks, nor other importunate, so this is like persistent and annoying, nor other importunate despicability of men or mud elements afflicted Abbot Hugo anymore. But he dropped his rosaries, closed his account books, closed his old eyes, and lay down into the long sleep. Heavy laden, hoary old Dominus Hugo, fare thee well. Hoary means very old, often suggesting ancient, gray, etc. So, Abbot Hugo has passed away. The troubles, the coil, all these different kinds of people chasing him, the Jewish usurers, the grumbling monks, and various other. I mean, you can tell, like, everybody was trying to get a piece of this frail man, and he had a lot of part in that. So I am much less charitable to Abbot Hugo compared to Jocelyn and Thomas Carlyle. But finally, these troubles, the troubles of the world that were causing him to retreat into his chamber, he was dismissed of them all. And Carlyle says, fare thee well. One thing we cannot mention without a due thrill of horror, namely that in the empty, without a due thrill of horror. Okay, so after his death, something horrible was noticed, namely that in the empty exchequer of Dominus Hugo. So, sorry, it's a little bit choppy, it's a hard language, but exchequer means the money chest or treasury. So, the abbot's fund from which all alms and expenses were paid. Basically, the abbot, the head of the monastery, when they looked into his treasury chest, it was empty. So either it really was empty, or, in my opinion, more likely, it was raided. But either way, it was completely empty. There was not found one penny to distribute to the poor, that they may pray for his soul. By a kind of godsend, 50 shillings did, in the very nick of time, fall due, or seem to fall due, from one of his farmers, the Firmarius de Palagrava. So this is the farmer of Palagrava. And he paid it, and the poor had it, though, alas, this only too seemed to fall due, only seemed to fall due, and we had to pay it again afterwards. Dominus Hugo's apartments were plundered by his servants to the last portable stool in a few minutes after the breath was out of his body. Forlorn old Hugo, fare thee well forever. And now, despite everything, I find myself identifying is the wrong word, but like connecting on a human level to Abbot Hugo, because this is like an extraordinarily sad, undignified, tragic way to pass, frankly. So you can see that the head of the monastery, this is like having literally nothing in his bank accounts, in his money chest, right? So like either he was truly so bad that like people were literally raiding the monies of the abbot while he was alive, or right after he died, they made a beeline to the treasury chest and got the money. either way, this is like a poor old man that was being enormously taken advantage of by the people around him, including his servants, including those to whom he entrusted his care. Very, very sad, very, very sad situation. To the point, and Jocelyn makes it a point of pointing this out, that apparently there was a tradition when a monk dies, or maybe when the abbot dies or something, you give a little bit money to the poor so that they pray for his soul. I think this is like a universal, it's found in many cultures, like a universal kind of gesture. You do something for the poor, for the disadvantaged in your society, and you hope to get their goodwill. And the people that took advantage of this monk, like either even while he was alive or right after his death, those that plundered his apartment to the last portable stool. They literally left nothing in the man's apartment or in the man's chambers, to say nothing of value. I mean, if they didn't even leave a stool to sit on, like imagine everything that they raided. And it's just like, and they were so greedy in the way they took that for this man that they had enormous access to. Clearly, I mean, the people that have access to the abbot's money and chambers, these are people that he trusted, or at least that he surrounded himself with. These are the hyenas, the flatterers around him, right? And they picked it apart so much to the bone that there wasn't even the little bit of money that you're supposed to give to the poor so that they pray for your soul. They didn't even leave that much money. Like, this is an extraordinary level of contempt towards a man that was taking care of you. Like, you can say Abbot Hugo did not take care of the monastery. He mortgaged the future of the monastery. But he did take care of the flatterers around him. He did take care of the servants. And the way they repaid him, the way they acted in his death, is with such a shameless level of contempt that they took everything. And this is, so I had a couple of thoughts. We'll see if I think I said most of it as we were going through it, but this just makes me think that weak leaders are so contemptible even by those that they benefit. This is like a shocking thing, but it's a thing that you realize then as you realize now. By the way, forlorn means desperately sad, abandoned, or helpless. Another thing I wanted to say actually before reflecting is like one of the farmers, the other crazy thing is like one of his farmers, right? You get the sense that like this is one of the farmers that clearly liked Abbot Hugo. He finally gave like those 50 shillings and the prayers were made by the poor, etc. But even this farmer, he only seemed to give the money because he actually demanded it back from the monastery. So he only, in an ironic or befitting gesture, he only also saved the day, and afterwards the money was due again. And I was like, how many farmers would a monastery like this have? So ChatGPT thinks that there are dozens. A large abbey like St. Edmund's would likely have 20 to 50 farmers, rent-paying tenants. And then did I want to say something? So, I mean, at this point, we're in the year 1180. Abbot Hugo has died, and Samson is going to take office a little bit later, I think a year and 3 months later, as we had read. And he's going to rule until 1211, so that's 31 years, or 30 years. So, yeah, a couple of reflections. Let me see. I loved how when this is going to be a little bit like smattering of thoughts. I think mostly I said what I wanted to say, but in case there are a couple of other things come up, I'm looking at my notes. One of them is like I think when I think of Abbot Hugo's time, as I mentioned, like the thing that comes to my mind is just an enormous dereliction of duty by the abbots, by the other monks that are supposed to have at least some loyalty to the monastery. Frankly, in a way that is not mentioned in this chapter at all, by the king and by the king's almoner. Like, it's also, I mean, imagine if you're like sent by the king to investigate a situation. And so you notice that like the person that you're investigating pulls his team, the people that report to him, into a room and asks his team, is there a problem? And nobody says anything. And I'm sure like they looked at each other. I'm sure there was fear in their eyes. But the almoner makes nothing of it and just goes back. He takes his word for it. Like, that's also a dereliction of duty. King Henry II not looking into it any further, that's also a dereliction of duty. And all these sorts of things, they lead to like having grievances like this fester, obviously, if not handled, if not resolved, lead to events like the massacre at York Castle. So there's like just a total dereliction of duty inside the monastery and outside the monastery happening in England in these days. And the image that started coming to my mind is that of a rot. And that's an important reason why I think the focus of Carlyle / Jocelyn on the Jewish community that was giving them the money was entirely wrong. Like, once a rot sets in somewhere, like external actors are going to come in and they're going to, again, like, I don't endorse usury, I don't like it, but I understand it. Like, it's kind of like a rival ethnic community that is wanting some of the resources and power of this particular community, right? Like, that's easy for me to understand. What is not easy for me to understand or excuse is the systemic issues and the individual choices that are causing the rot inside the monastery, the decay. And the image of decay and rots and dereliction of duty, it's interesting how multiple times Carlyle has associated them with a sweet, warm comfort. It's like, and one more thing I'm going to say. So as I mentioned, Carlyle says, "Forlorn Abbot Hugo, fare thee well forever." And forlorn means desperately sad, abandoned or hopeless. I found it so interesting how being desperately sad, abandoned, and hopeless goes hand in hand with comfort, with warm comfort, warm delusions. It's like rot and decay and comfort and desperation, they all go hand in hand, which also means like probably the opposite things go hand in hand as well, right? Like, courage will actually beget happiness. Courage will probably beget the feeling of not being abandoned. So courage will beget allies. Courage will beget hope. Like, fascinating. Fascinating. Like, you never associate courageous men, heroic men, religious men even, you don't associate them with comfort. And yeah, that I just have to like ponder that a little bit. I also loved that we got a little bit of a sense of like what Samson's up to in this time. So as we know, Samson is going to reign over the monastery for 30 years following Abbot Hugo's death. And he's going to be a very good leader. Like, that's by all accounts. I mean, we haven't read that part yet. So, but I'm assuming like Abbot Samson's going to be a good leader by the accounts we've seen so far and the research we've seen so far. And it's interesting, you see a glimpse of Samson before he's an abbot. He is reporting, he's a master of novices, he's reporting to Abbot Hugo. So he is a little bit powerful, but he doesn't have like actual executive decision-making authority yet. And we see what Samson's doing at this time. It's very interesting. Samson, he doesn't throw himself into the fire just to be a hero, right? Like, sometimes we see people that don't have enough power to make a change, like needlessly burn themselves or burn their career to make a statement or something. So specifically, like when the king's almoner came and Abbot Hugo asked his monks, like, is there a problem, guys? Samson kept his mouth shut. He did not unnecessarily act beyond his power level. Very, very interesting, very wise. Like, it's almost like, I mean, obviously Samson was not quite in a didactic mode, but given that he became a very good leader later, can we like get the lesson for ourselves of don't be a hero, don't be a hero. Like Samson focused on his role as the master of novices in this environment. So, in fact, Jocelyn said, like, Samson was a good teacher. He was observant. I knew him well. That's why I asked him, right? So Samson is focusing on his little area, and he's doing his duties the best he can, and he's not unnecessarily becoming a hero for problems he can't fix. Just a very stoic mindset. I love that. I think the position of Samson actually is very relatable too. Like when you are in a dysfunctional environment with a dysfunctional / detached / petty tyrant kind of a boss, and you have to make the best. Like, do you sacrifice yourself, your career? No. You do the best of what is entrusted to you, and you don't like cause unnecessary ruckus beyond that. I just loved it. Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously I disagree with a lot of what Carlyle and Jocelyn have said. So I've pointed that out plenty. But you just want to like reach into Abbot Hugo. I mean, when Carlyle says, what could old Abbot Hugo do? Like, you just want to almost say like, Abbot Hugo, like if you had a chance to talk to him, frankly, maybe if Abbot Hugo himself had a chance to talk to himself in the past, like if the dead and spiritual Abbot Hugo could come to the living Abbot Hugo in a dream and kind of give him some advice. It's interesting how, like, you can actually reinvent yourself. Like, this is an interesting question. Like, what could Abbot Hugo do, right? There's a momentum of bad choices that he has done. There's a momentum of bad people that has surrounded himself with. But you can tell, like, a person losing agency as he's stopped being an actor in this world and merely is following the momentum of his past choices. And you can tell, like, this went on for 14 years. And there's nothing stopping a person, like in theory, at least, from reinventing himself from one day to the other, or making slow surgical choices to become a different person. And like, I think Abbot Hugo would have found a lot of support among a lot of the monks. Like, there were so many people that wanted to do the right thing, that even tried, and that he sent literally to prison over. And I can't help but wonder if he had a little bit of courage, if he had gone to those people, to Robert, what were their names? To Robert, to Hugo, to Samson, and said, I've reflected on it, I prayed, I had a dream, whatever. I realized the error of my ways. Can you help me? Like I feel like it didn't have to get to this enormously terrible position where Jocelyn, a novice at his monastery, is saying, happily, Abbot Hugo died. The people, like, the servants are ungrateful. They're taking you down to your last 50 shillings, to the last little bit of hope that you have of getting some prayers for your soul. They're even taking that. They're even, like, things reach the point where they are taking that. Things reach the point where the newest members of your monastery are happy that you die. Like, you just get the sense it did not. I mean, the lack of courage and the lack of, and the pursuit of comfort. This is like a cautionary tale. Like, this is the part where I'm again like empathizing and connecting with Abbot Hugo in a very sort of, this fills me with dread. Like, this story, it fills me with dread. It fills me with dread that, like, a wise man, because Abbot Hugo was not a nobody, right? He was a monk. He did his studies. He was promoted all the way to the master of the monastery. He served his duty for 23 years, right? So, like, this man clearly showed some promise at some point earlier in his life, but at some point, there was a snowball of lack of courage, of retreat, of a little bit too much indulgence in the comforts, of a little bit too much believing the flatterers, a little bit of delusion snowballed into this horrible way to die. And it just, like, it's a cautionary tale. It is an incredibly cautionary tale that fills me with dread. This chapter, I mean, it has a lot of, as I said, a lot of parts I don't quite agree with. I have different perspective. But this story, this human story of Abbot Hugo, of like where inaction and lack of courage can lead to if you let it, that is not a good place. That is a dark, dark, dark place. And yeah, that darkness will follow me for a while. Well, thank you for joining me for this reading of Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 4, Abbot Hugo.